Welcome again. Today we take a look at some of the understandings required for topics 4.1 and 4.2 in the IB Biology syllabus for first exams in 2016. Species are groups of organisms that can potentially interbreed and produce fertile offspring. A pair of lions can potentially reproduce and produce offspring which in turn can have offspring of their own. Fertile offspring means offspring that can in turn reproduce. There are cases where organisms can breed, but their offspring are sterile and can't produce offspring of their own, like a donkey and a horse producing a mule. A mule is sterile, it cannot produce offspring of its own. Lions and tigers are also separate species, for although a male lion have offspring with a female tiger to produce a liger, most ligers have been observed to be infertile. And although there have been claims of ligers existing in the wild, this, if it ever occurred, would be very rare. Most ligers in captivity have been observed to be infertile. But members of species can undergo a reproductive isolation. For example, Siberian tigers and Bengal tigers. They are both members of the same species, but they have certain distinct characteristics because of reproductive isolation, distinct pools where genes do not mix but are separated by geography, such as a mountain range or a large distance or separation of an island from a mainland. This reproductive isolation is a precursor for eventual speciation. Species are either autotrophic or heterotrophic in their mode of nutrition. Here, this plant, a producer, a photosynthetic organism, is referred to as an autotroph because it requires water from the soil, carbon dioxide from the air, and sunlight in order to manufacture glucose in the process of photosynthesis. Such an organism is described as autotrophic or as a producer. Consumers are heterotrophs. They feed on other living organisms, and they do so by taking material into their digestive system, breaking it down internally and absorbing the nutrients. Like when I consume this banana, or these mice feeding on grain. Specialized heterotrophs, known as detritivores, obtain organic nutrients by feeding on detritus, dead organic material, like the dead leaves from this tree. An excellent example of a detritivore is an earthworm, which takes dead organic material like a leaf into its digestive system, digests it internally, and takes up the nutrients from that internal digestion. These kinds of heterotrophs are specifically categorized as detritivores, feeding on detritus. But some decomposers are referred to as saprotrophs because they do not take material into their bodies. They feed by an external digestion, where digestive enzymes are passed on to the substrate upon which they live, and they then absorb the nutrients when it is digested outside of their bodies. These organisms include bacteria and fungi, and they play a very important role in decomposition in ecosystems. This group is referred to as the saprotrophs. Community is formed by populations of different species living together and interacting with each other. Here in this aquarium, you can see several species interacting with each other and living together. Community then forms an ecosystem by its interaction with the abiotic environment, the nutrients, the exchange of gases, and the water if it's an aquatic system, or the soil if it's a terrestrial system. Autotrophs, like these green plants, obtain inorganic nutrients from the abiotic environment. And we must be aware that autotrophic organisms also live in aquatic systems. So this autotroph obtains its nutrients from the abiotic environment, which is its soil. But other kinds of autotrophs, like these aquatic plants, they obtain their nutrients by absorption from the water that surrounds them. This supply of nutrients for plants is provided by nutrient cycling, as decomposers like saprotrophs and detritivores break down this organic material into a form that allows it to be taken up by plant roots or to be absorbed by aquatic plants. Without these essential components of ecosystems, the nutrient cycling would be disrupted and ultimately systems will fall apart. So if you had to build a closed system that is going to sustain itself, like this one, or like this one, then an essential component would be the presence of decomposers for nutrient cycling. Ecosystems have the potential to be sustainable over long periods of time. But not only do we must have nutrient cycling from decomposers, we must also have light so that autotrophic organisms can fix the sun's energy into chemical energy to provide food for other organisms within the system, the heterotrophic organisms within the system. Most, but not all ecosystems rely on a supply of energy from sunlight. And the reason we say that most, but not all, is because some ecosystems thrive in areas like hydrothermal vents way down at the bottom of the ocean. But in the majority of ecosystems, plants are required to sustain the entire system, for they are the ones that fix light energy into chemical energy by the process of photosynthesis. And this chemical energy in glucose is built up into cellulose in most plants, and when consumers feed on plant material like these mice, or when humans feed on plant material, energy is released from carbon compounds. This energy that I just took in from that banana is going to be released in my body as I digest the sugars, allowing me to use some of it for respiration as muscles move and I speak to you in this video. But as those muscles move and consume the energy from the banana, some of it is released as heat. And living organisms cannot convert heat into any other form of energy. So, as living organisms metabolize and use the energy from food, a lot of energy is lost as heat from ecosystems. Even when these producers are struck by light from the sun, not all of the wavelengths of visible light are used in the photosynthetic process, and much of it is lost as heat. For as I consume the energy in this banana, a lot of it is lost as heat. As more and more links are added to food chains, the amount of energy that goes from one feeding level to the next level becomes less. And ultimately, the amount of energy available would be so small that it would not be able to sustain a viable population beyond 3 or 4 links in most food chains.